We'd like to thank Morgan & Morgan for supporting PBS. Gas is expensive, food's expensive, everything is expensive. And a lot of it is because of a little thing you probably don't think about much: maritime commerce. Specifically, the virtual shutdown of this strip of water, the Strait of Hormuz, during the US and Israel's war with Iran. But having its economy in a chokehold by waterways thousands of miles away is actually one of America's oldest traditions. In fact, having access to trade on the seas is so important that it drove the US to its first foreign war in 1801, called the First Barbary War. This forgotten war in northern Africa helped lay the groundwork for American foreign policy for the next 225 years. It's a story of firsts: the first national navy, the country's first engagement with the Islamic world, and its first rogue attempt to overthrow another nation's ruler. I'm Hernibot, and this is In the Margins. America's fixation on free trade goes way back. One of the main gripes with the British that led to the Revolutionary War was over their, quote, cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, end quote. When the US won, statesmen like John Adams pushed to send trade ships to China immediately. He believed that expanding overseas commerce was critical to American prosperity, and he worried that Britain would stand in the way, which they did. For instance, the British Empire had blocked the US from trading with the West Indies, reserving that right for British subjects. But the bigger blow was that American merchant ships would no longer have the protection of the British Navy. After the war, the US was vulnerable. They had sold off their warships. So when American ships sailed in the Mediterranean Sea, which was the main access way to Europe and a major global trade hub, dozens of their ships were captured by foreign powers. In 1790, Thomas Jefferson claimed, though he was exaggerating, that trade in the region was deadlocked because sailors feared being taken specifically by the Barbary states. These states lined the North African coast. They were Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli. The Barbary states had a practice of selling captives into slave labor until a ransom was negotiated. To the Barbary states, they were abiding by their legal system, which required that other nations pay a tribute to travel the water safely. European nations had been paying these tributes for more than 200 years, but Americans saw their captors as pirates. Though people of all races were captured, white Americans were outraged that white captives were being enslaved. They extensively detailed life in captivity, the severities of which are beyond your imagination, according to one letter writer. In 1786, the US established its own treaty with Morocco, one of the Barbary states, which was also the first country to recognize American sovereignty. Treaties with the other three Barbary states followed in the 1790s. Thomas Jefferson, the Secretary of State under Washington, helped negotiate these treaties and the release of captives, but he didn't think the tributes would be a lasting solution. On a practical level, the US could hardly afford to pay the fees. The initial treaty payment was about $1.25 million, which was 1/5 of the national budget at the time. The tributes were also politically costly. People like Richard O'Brien, a former captive turned US consul to Algiers, thought that paying the tribute was dishonorable and weak. But the US was weak and still a minor player, especially compared to Britain and France. Once these two powers began fighting the Napoleonic Wars, both nations captured neutral US ships to keep America from trading with our enemy. The US government was ready to fight to protect its ships and reputation. In 1794, George Washington signed the Naval Armament Act, which authorized the construction of 6 naval warships to fend off Barbary attacks. The last frigate, named the President, was completed in 1800. By 1801, the US had fallen behind on its payments to multiple Barbary states when the ruler of Tripoli, Yusuf Karamanli, demanded a $225,000 tribute up front, plus another $20,000 each year. In May of that year, Tripoli declared war on the US and cut down the American consulate's flagpole. Thomas Jefferson, the third president who had just taken office, ordered naval ships to confront Tripoli and also to blockade its harbor. Although the US won an early battle on the seas that August, come winter, the war was at a stalemate. At home, things remained tense economically. There were three major challenges for America's war efforts. The first issue was physical. Crews at sea were constantly getting sick from things like scurvy, yellow fever, syphilis, or even the plague. Sickness abroad was made even worse by the second challenge, which was that America had no overseas bases. This may be surprising since today the US has far more overseas bases than any other country in the world. But at the time, the US didn't have any. This made it very difficult to repair and resupply ships with fresh food, medical supplies, and ammunition until other nations like Spain offered to help. The third big challenge, broadly speaking, was poor leadership. Here's the thing, in the early 1800s, communication with Congress was really slow. It took an average of 55 days to travel from the US to the Mediterranean. Navy commanders often had to rely on their own judgment, which was, by many accounts, questionable. Take Richard Valentine Morris, who was tapped to command the US squadron in the Mediterranean. Commodore Morris arrived in May 1802 along with his wife and child, the first sign that he was a little underprepared for war. In June, a corsair from Tripoli captured an American merchant ship called the Franklin off the Spanish coast, with about 9 captives taken for enslavement. This incident was embarrassing for the US because it revealed that their blockade, it wasn't working. American forces were split between enforcing the blockade and being protective envoys for American ships, which made them less effective at both. Commodore Morris attempted to negotiate with Tripoli, but bafflingly, he dismissed the US consul to Tripoli, James Lander Cathcart, without telling his superiors. As a former captive, Cathcart was a rare American on the ground who actually spoke the language and knew the local rituals for diplomacy. After just one day, negotiations fell apart when Morris balked at Tripoli's demand for at least $200,000. Relations had also soured with Morocco, and they declared war on the US. But in 1803, things finally started to turn around for the Americans. Congress recalled Morris and put him on trial for, quote, dereliction of duty, end quote. He was replaced by Commodore Edward Preble, who was given more ships and who leaned on advisors who actually understood and respected the local culture. Preble applied his diplomatic skills towards the Sultan of Morocco, Moulay Suleiman. Aware of the Sultan's strong sense of honor, Preble's delegation offered public salutes and gifts, including tea, sugar, and linens. In October of 1803, Morocco agreed to a peace treaty with the US without further payments. Now Preble could focus solely on Tripoli. In October, the US warship Philadelphia ran aground and was taken by Tripoli. Refitting the powerful gunship could have tipped the scales towards Tripoli. So the US planned a daring sneak attack. Led by Stephen Decatur, a small force fought their way onto the Philadelphia and set it on fire. This, burning down its own ship, was the US's biggest victory in the war. And it was made possible by a local man named Salvatore Catalano. His knowledge made it possible for Decatur to navigate Tripoli's shores. Now, halfway through the war, the US was beginning to accept that audacity or American exceptionalism alone wouldn't win the day. They had started to improve slightly at foreign diplomacy, but they needed more help, even from unlikely parties. If you've ever heard the Marines hymn, then you've heard a hint about how this war ended. It involves marching to the shores of Tripoli. Since 1801, the US consul to Tunis, William Eaton, had been secretly crafting a backup plan. Eaton believed that the US could overthrow the ruler of Tripoli, Yusuf Karamanli, by backing his exiled brother, Hamet. It took a few years to get buy-in from the Navy, but even then, Commodore Samuel Barron warned Eaton not to promise a throne to Hamet. But Eaton had already made that promise. In 1805, Eaton's men finally met with Hamet and survived a brutal 500-mile march from Alexandria to Derna. Yusuf's forces were also on their way to Derna since Ian's plan was a terribly kept secret. Ian and Hammond got to Derna first and succeeded in taking the city. Ian knew they couldn't hold Derna against Yusuf's forces, so they escaped by sea. But the plan had already paid off. During Ian's march, Yusuf Karamanli started putting out feelers for peace talks with the US. Historians say it's unlikely that Yusuf felt threatened by the US. It's more that he was tired of dealing with this annoying conflict and felt it hampered Tripoli's ability to focus on their perpetual enemies like the Italian states. On June 10, 1805, the US and Tripoli signed a treaty to end the war. So did America win their first foreign war? Kinda. Technically, the US saw the treaty as a win, but they kept paying tributes to Algiers and gifts to Tunis and Morocco. American ships were also increasingly targeted by Britain and France, who were fighting the Napoleonic Wars. By 1812, the US was back at war with Britain, fighting to defend America's access to free trade on the sea. In the big scheme of things, the First Barbary War didn't immediately change the US. By the end of the war, the US was still a relatively weak nation, but the path to becoming a global power had been revealed. Whoever controlled trade on the seas controlled significant economic power. Throughout history till today, America's desire to protect its economic interests continues to lead the country through wars, colonization, and interventions in other countries, no matter the costs. To learn more about what life was like for these pirates, check out this episode of Rogue History, link in the description. Thanks again to Morgan & Morgan for supporting PBS. Morgan & Morgan has more than 1,000 lawyers and 140 offices nationwide. Founded in 1988, Morgan & Morgan has been fighting for their clients for over 35 years. Morgan & Morgan is committed to serving those who have been injured by someone else's negligence. Their mission is centered on advocating for individuals, fighting for justice, and empowering those who may not have a voice in the legal system. To find out more information about Morgan & Morgan, you can go to forthepeople.com/PBS.